I'm not worth saving. The words tore out of Sofia Sinclair before she could stop them. October air cut like a blade across the Valenti mansion driveway at 6:22 p.m., dead leaves skittering past her worn black shoes, her breath visible in white clouds. Sofia stood 20 feet from the sleek black Mercedes, her maid's uniform still crisp from the morning shift, her hands trembling not from cold but from what she had just seen, the small silver wire tucked beneath the driver's side door, the wrong shape, the wrong placement. Across the circular driveway, Signora Maria Valenti, Giovanni's 71-year-old mother with silver hair and kind eyes, reached for the door handle, her shopping bags rustling in the wind. Sofia's 5 crumpled dollar bills pressed against her thigh in her pocket. Everything she had left in the world. The foreclosure notice for $22,000 still pinned above her bed at home like a death sentence written in bold black ink. She was nobody. A maid in black and white who cleaned toilets and was invisible to everyone in this house. But her father had been a mechanic before the cancer took him, and she knew what a car bomb looked like. "Mrs. Valenti, stop!" Sofia screamed, her voice cracking as she sprinted forward, her worn soles slapping concrete. The older woman turned, confused, hand still on the chrome handle. Sofia didn't think. She grabbed Maria's wrist and yanked her backward with such force they both tumbled onto the gravel just as the car exploded. A mushroom of orange flame and black smoke erupted upward, turning the evening into blazing day. Metal screamed. Glass shattered across the driveway like rain made of daggers. The shockwave knocked them flat onto the cold ground. Sofia's ears rang with a sound like the entire world was screaming. Heat washed over them in waves. Smoke filled the air, thick and choking, tasting like burned plastic and something darker. Maria gasped, her arms still gripped in Sofia's hands. Then the shouting began. Tires screeched on the curved drive. Car doors slammed open. Men in dark suits poured from black SUVs, weapons drawn, moving like a choreographed nightmare. But one voice cut through everything, raw, desperate, broken. "Mama!" Giovanni Valenti ran across the driveway in his charcoal suit, his Italian leather shoes striking the ground with purpose, his face, the face that had sentenced men to death without flinching, that commanded rooms with nothing but a glance, completely shattered. He dropped to his knees beside his mother, his large hands shaking as he touched her face, checking for injuries, searching her eyes with a fear so pure it seemed impossible this man had ever caused pain to anyone. Maria whispered, trembling, "The girl. The maid saved me." Giovanni's dark eyes locked onto Sofia. Really looked at her for the first time. She was 27 years old, with chestnut hair pulled back in a practical bun, with hands that were calloused from cleaning, with eyes that had seen more suffering than anyone that young should have seen. Her uniform was torn at the shoulder from the fall. A thin line of blood ran down her left temple. When his gaze found that blood, something shifted in Giovanni Valenti's chest. Something cold and dangerous stirred, waking from a sleep so long he thought the capacity for it had died years ago. His jaw clenched. His throat worked. His hands trembled as he looked at her, really looked at her, and then this man, this king of the Los Angeles underworld, put his face in his hands and his shoulders shook with something that might have been rage or might have been grief or might have been both woven together so tightly they could not be separated. Carlo approached, his lieutenant of 15 years, his face grim. "Boss. The bomb was professional. Whoever did this is still out there." Giovanni didn't move. He remained on his knees, shoulders heaving, while his mother's hands reached out and touched his head the way a mother touches a son, trying to comfort him, trying to bring him back from the darkness. And in that moment, no one could have known that this scene, this girl in her maid's uniform, this explosion, this broken king, would become the center of a story that would reshape everything. But something had already been set in motion 3 weeks earlier. Something had begun the night Sofia Sinclair walked into the Golden Diner at midnight for a double shift, her stomach empty, her fear larger than her body could contain, and Douglas Hale was waiting. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning, 3 weeks before the explosion, to a moment when a poor girl was still invisible and a predator was learning her name. 3 weeks earlier. October 1st. The Golden Diner on 5th and Main. Sofia's feet hurt. They hurt in a way that had become normal, a dull throb that started somewhere in her bones and radiated outward until her entire body was a map of exhaustion. She had worked the morning shift at the Valenti mansion, cleaning bathrooms, scrubbing marble floors on her hands and knees, folding clothes that cost more than her monthly rent, and then she had driven home in her 2009 Honda Civic with the check engine light that never went off, eaten 2 crackers with a glass of water, and returned here to the diner for the night shift. The kitchen was grimy with grease. The coffee smelled like it had been brewing since yesterday. The vinyl booths were cracked and repaired with duct tape in colors that didn't match. Sofia tied her apron around her waist and checked the register, $43 from the previous shift. She had 4 days to make rent. For days to turn $43 into the $360 she needed, or the landlord would file papers. She already had the foreclosure notice. She already knew what losing everything looked like. Her name tag said Sofia. Beneath it, someone had scratched the word forget. The dinner rush came at 6:30. A family with 3 children ordered burgers and fries. Construction workers ordered eggs. An elderly couple ordered coffee and split a piece of pie. Sofia moved between tables like a ghost, quick and quiet and invisible. She refilled water glasses. She wiped down booths. She smiled when people made eye contact and erased herself when they didn't. By 9 o'clock, the diner had emptied except for a man in booth 7. He was approximately 45 years old, with dark blonde hair graying at the temples, with the kind of expensive casual clothing that meant money, a cashmere sweater, designer jeans, a watch that probably cost more than Sofia's car. He was handsome in the way men who have always gotten what they wanted tend to be handsome. There was no humility in his face. No doubt. He drank coffee and read a newspaper and watched her work. Sofia felt his eyes on her. She always felt when men watched. It was a sensation like fingers trailing down her spine. The man closed his newspaper. He gestured to her with one finger. "Come here." Sofia approached the booth. The overhead lights reflected off his expensive watch. Close up, she could smell his cologne and something else underneath it, something that made her nervous. "What's your name?" he asked. His voice was smooth. It was the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Sofia," she said. It came out as barely a whisper. "Sofia. That's pretty. You look tired, Sofia." She didn't respond. She had learned not to engage with men who watched her the way he watched her. "How much do you make in a shift?" he asked. He leaned back in the booth. His eyes traveled from her face to her body and back again. "Tips are usually bad," she said carefully. "I bet they are." "You live nearby?" Sofia's hand tightened on her order pad. The pencil bent slightly under her grip. "I should check on other tables." But he didn't let her leave. He reached into his wallet and placed 5 $100 bills on the table. He spread them out so she could see them clearly. $500, he said. "That's what I'm going to leave as a tip. All you have to do is sit down for 5 minutes and have coffee with me." Sofia stared at the money. $500 was more money than she had in her apartment. $500 was half of rent. $500 was the difference between keeping her apartment and living in her car. Her hand trembled. She didn't sit down. His smile widened. He knew she wanted to. That's the point of watching someone desperate, Sofia would later realize. You don't have to force them. The desperation does the work for you. "My name is Douglas Hale," he said. "And I think we could help each other. You need money. I have money. There are people who work for me. People who make very good money doing simple tasks. Would you be interested in hearing about that?" Sofia's mouth had gone dry. She had read stories about women who disappeared. She had heard things in waiting rooms and on buses, stories about women who took money from men like this and were never seen again. "No," she said. "Thank you, but no." Douglas picked up the $500 bills and fanned them slowly like a deck of cards. "Think about it. I'll be here tomorrow night. If you change your mind, I'll be waiting." He left $30 under his coffee cup and took the $500 with him. Sofia stood frozen beside the booth, her hands shaking, her heart hammering. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The kitchen clock ticked. And in the distance, through the front window, she could see a black SUV waiting at the curb with its engine running. She had no idea that somewhere across the city, in an office on the 42nd floor of a building that touched the clouds, Giovanni Valenti was meeting with his lieutenant about a human trafficking ring operating in Los Angeles. She had no idea that Douglas Hale's name was about to cross his desk. She had no idea that 3 weeks from now, she would scream to save a woman's life and change everything. 3 weeks before the burning car. Before the screaming. Before everything changed. 2:34 in the morning. Sofia Sinclair sat on a mattress placed directly on the floor of her studio apartment, and in the yellow circle of a single desk lamp, she counted 5 $1 bills. Again. The bills were soft from handling, worn at the edges like prayer cards. She smoothed them against her thigh. $5. That was all. The foreclosure notice pinned above her pillow caught the lamplight. Final demand, $22,000, 7 days remaining. 7 days. 168 hours. The numbers blurred. 2 years ago, her mother had a stroke. Massive, devastating, the kind that rewires a person's entire body into a prison. Sofia had signed the medical consent forms with shaking hands, authorized the surgery, the rehabilitation, the experimental medications that insurance wouldn't cover. $23,000 in debt. Then came the interest. Then came the compounding. Then came the eviction notice. Then came the studio apartment with water stains on the ceiling that looked like maps of countries that no longer existed. She was 26 years old. At 5 o'clock in the morning, Sofia pulled on her black maid's uniform. The fabric had faded to gray from washings, but the white apron was still stiff with starch, still crisp from the dollar store where she had bought it 3 months ago. She looked at herself in the mirror mounted on the bathroom door, a face that looked older than it should, eyes that had forgotten how to hope, hair pulled back so tight it gave her headaches. A ghost in a uniform. She caught 2 buses to the Valenti mansion in the hills, the kind of house that sat behind gates, the kind where the driveway curved for half a mile. The other maids didn't speak to her. Sofia noticed this on her first day and stopped trying. She was too quiet, they decided. Too poor. The way she wore the same black shoes with a split sole every single day marked her as someone from a different world. Someone to be avoided the way you avoid a stray dog, not cruel, just distant. She cleaned the 3rd-floor bathrooms with ammonia that burned her nostrils until her eyes watered. She scrubbed shower tile with a toothbrush. She wiped down marble counters that cost more than her annual salary. She kept her head down. She became invisible. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, her shift ended. She took 3 more buses across the city to the diner on 7th Street, the Midnight Grill, where the checkered floor was black and white and sticky with decades of spilled coffee. The neon sign buzzed in the window like a dying wasp. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. This was where she worked from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, for nights a week, for $6.50 an hour plus tips that ranged from $0 to $3. The truckers came in around midnight, tired men with weathered faces and calloused hands. The insomniacs came in at 3 in the morning, people running from something or toward nothing, Sofia could never decide which. She moved between the booths with a coffee pot, her feet aching, her back screaming, her mind already calculating. She had made $14 tonight. That brought her total to $19. She needed $5,000 more to survive the week. The math never worked. It never would. Douglas Hale sat in her section on a Tuesday night in late September. He was 47 years old. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored, expensive, the kind of suit that announced he had money the way other people announced they were alive. His watch was gold. His shoes had been polished so carefully they reflected the diner's lights like mirrors. He ordered black coffee that he never drank and watched Sofia with eyes that calculated value the way a jeweler calculates carats. She felt those eyes. It made her spine tighten. He left a $50 tip on a $4 check and smiled. His smile was wide and practiced. He told her, "You look like someone who needs an opportunity." His business card was cream-colored, thick cardstock, no emblem. Douglas Hale, consultant. A phone number. An address downtown. Sofia's hands trembled as she pocketed the card. Some instinct, buried deep, screamed at her not to. She had heard stories. Women disappearing. Women taken to apartments and never leaving. She had heard these stories on buses, in waiting rooms, from customers who lowered their voices and looked over their shoulders. But she also had 7 days and $22,000 that might as well have been $1 million. He came back the next night. And the night after that. Each time he left more money. $300 one night. He started bringing her information printed on sheets of paper, brochures for independent contractors making $500 per week for simple work. The numbers were impossible. They were too good. They were exactly the number she needed to not lose everything. "Think about what I'm offering," he said on the 4th night, his voice smooth as oil. "Think about your mother. Think about keeping her safe." How did he know about her mother? Sofia's throat had closed. She didn't take the job. Something inside her, some ancient warning written into her bones, refused. But she also didn't throw away his number. She kept it in her shoe, pressed against her instep, a small weight that reminded her every day that desperation was a doorway. All she had to do was open it. What Sofia didn't know was that Douglas Hale specialized in women exactly like her, invisible, desperate, alone, without family to ask where they had gone. He had a network of at least 12 women. Some of them had simply vanished. Some of them were still working for him, their eyes dead, their smiles painted on like masks. He circled her the way a predator circles wounded prey, patient, deliberate, knowing that all he had to do was wait. Desperation always breaks eventually. And what neither Douglas nor Sofia knew was that 72 hours away, fate was about to place her on a collision course with a man named Giovanni Valenti that would transform everything. At that exact moment, in an office on the 42nd floor of a glass building downtown that touched the clouds, Giovanni sat behind a desk made from Italian marble and listened to his lieutenants describe a human trafficking operation spreading through Los Angeles like a virus. 12 victims identified. Possibly more. The network was sophisticated, protected, connected to people in high places. One name kept surfacing, Douglas Hale. "Find him," Giovanni said. His voice was deep and solid, like an oath. "I want to know everything. Where he sleeps. Who he meets. What he eats. Every detail." Carlo, his most trusted lieutenant, a man with silver threading through his dark hair and scars on both knuckles, leaned forward. "This could take weeks. Then we start tonight." Giovanni stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city spread below him, 1,000 lights in the darkness, 1,000 lives being lived without his knowledge. Somewhere down there, someone was in danger. Somewhere down there, Douglas Hale was circling vulnerable women like a shark circling blood in the water. Giovanni's hands clenched into fists. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother, "Emma won't stop asking when you're coming home. She misses her Uncle Giovanni." He smiled. His sister's daughter, 7 years old, with his dark eyes and her mother's gentle spirit. She was the only light left in his world, the only thing that made him remember he was something other than the weapon his father had carved him into. He didn't know that in 3 days, he would find her bleeding on a playground. He didn't know that a girl in a maid's uniform would carry her to his front door. He didn't know that when he looked into that girl's eyes that had learned to hide themselves but hadn't learned how to hide their capacity for love, something that had frozen in him years ago would begin to thaw. The clock on the wall ticked past 2 in the morning. Sofia finished her shift at the diner, collected her tips, $8 total, and took the bus home through empty streets. Rain had started falling, a cold October rain that cut through her thin jacket. She walked the 4 blocks from the bus stop with her head down, her hands in her pockets, her mind already calculating tomorrow's plan. Another shift at the mansion. Another evening at the diner. Another day of not enough. She had no way of knowing that the life she was living was about to collide with a world she couldn't imagine existed. She had no way of knowing that in 72 hours she would be running through rain and darkness, carrying a bleeding child, screaming for help from a man whose name she didn't know. She had no way of knowing that sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. The clock above the register at Danny's diner showed 11:11 p.m. when Victoria Ashford walked through the door like poison entering water. 6 women followed her, all furs, all diamonds, all the kind of wealth that had learned to weaponize cruelty. Sofia was refilling coffee at the corner booth when she heard the voice, sharp and cold as a blade wrapped in ice. "We need service. If this establishment can provide it." Sofia turned. She knew who Victoria Ashford was. Everyone in Los Angeles knew. The widow, they called her. The woman who collected broken things and broke them further just to watch them fall. Sofia's stomach tightened, but she walked over anyway, her notepad trembling slightly in her hands. "Welcome to Danny's. What can I get for you?" Victoria looked up from her menu slowly, deliberately, like Sofia was an insect she was deciding whether to crush. "Coffee. Black. And pray you don't contaminate it the way you contaminate everything else you touch." Her friends laughed. Sharp, coordinated laughter. The sound of people who had practiced being cruel together. Sofia nodded and turned toward the kitchen. Her hand shook as she poured the coffee, fresh from the pot, steam rising in fragile wisps. She had gotten so close to safety. The check from Giovanni had cleared that morning. $22,000. Her debts were gone. Her apartment was saved. For the first time in 4 years, she could see a future that didn't end in homelessness. Now she carried the coffee back to Victoria's table and set it down carefully, trying to make herself small, trying to be invisible the way she had learned. Victoria picked up the cup. She smelled it. Her face twisted with disgust. Then she threw the coffee directly into Sofia's face. The heat was instant and shocking. Sofia gasped, stumbling backward, her apron soaked, the coffee dripping from her hair into her eyes. The liquid burned like acid. Around the diner, conversation stopped. The pie eater at the counter froze mid-bite. The couple in the back booth looked up. Everyone saw it. Everyone witnessed it. "Disgusting," Victoria announced, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent diner like a curse. "This place employs thieves and trash. I've seen this girl pocket tips that weren't hers. She's a thief and probably diseased. Someone needs to call the health department before people actually get poisoned." She gestured to her friends with a manicured hand, and they all stood, gathering their things, preparing to leave. But Victoria wasn't finished. She turned back to Sofia one more time and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "No wonder you work in a dump like this. You probably belong in one." Sofia stood frozen, coffee dripping, her face burning with shame that had nothing to do with the heat. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there while 30 people in Danny's diner watched her be destroyed. At a booth in the far corner, partially hidden by shadow and the angle of the wall, Carlo sat very still. He had been nursing black coffee for 2 hours, Giovanni's instructions clear, keep an eye on her. Report anything unusual. The phone in his pocket was already recording, had been recording since Victoria walked in, since the first cruel word left her mouth. Carlo watched Sofia's face and saw something break there. He saw her shoulders curl inward like she was trying to disappear into her own skin. But then the front door opened. Wind cut through the diner, cold October air carrying the smell of rain and approaching storm. And Douglas Hale walked in. 47, expensive suit, the kind of handsome that had learned to weaponize itself. He moved towards Sofia with the confidence of a man who had never been told no, and he smiled. "Sofia," he said, his voice warm as a lie. "You look like you've had quite a night." Sofia's head snapped up. Douglas Hale. She had been trying to avoid him for 3 months. His texts had become more frequent, more insistent. His offers more specific. "Work for me," the latest message had read. "Good money. Easy work. All you have to do is be available." She knew what he meant. She knew exactly what he meant. And she had thought, with the money from Giovanni, she could finally refuse him. She could tell him no and mean it. But he was standing right in front of her now, and Victoria Ashford was watching from the exit to see what would happen next. "I'm not interested," Sofia said quietly. Douglas's smile didn't change. "You were interesting enough before. You needed money. You were desperate. Remember? You told me you couldn't pay your bills. You told me you were going to lose your apartment." He stepped closer. "I was going to help you, Sofia. I was going to save you. And you rejected me." The diner was silent enough to hear the rain starting outside, pattering against the windows like fingers tapping for entry. "Someone helped me," Sofia said. Her voice was very small. "I don't need your help anymore." Douglas's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Someone helped you? Who? What powerful man did you finally give yourself to?" He looked around the diner, studying the faces. "Was it a customer? One of your regular perverts?" He turned back to her, and his voice dropped lower, meaner. "Because I want you to understand something, Sofia. Whatever deal you made, whatever man you're involved with now, I own you. You owe me. You made a verbal agreement, and agreements have consequences." He stepped closer, and Sofia pressed backward against the counter. The coffee pot was behind her. The register. The hard edge of the counter pressing into her spine. "You have until tomorrow night," Douglas said, speaking only to her now, his voice quiet and deadly. "Tomorrow night, 9:56 p.m., you come find me. We conclude our business arrangement. Or I go to the police with the recording I have of you stealing tips from your register. I'll file a complaint with the health department about your handling of food. I'll make sure that Giovanni Valenti, yes, I know exactly who you've been working for, understands that you're a liability." He smiled. "Tomorrow night, Sofia. Don't disappoint me." He turned and walked out into the rain. Victoria and her friends followed, leaving the diner in shocked silence. Sofia stood frozen, her coffee-stained apron clinging to her skin, her wet hair dripping, her $5 in tips sitting useless in her pocket. The prayer card, her grandmother's prayer card, was still in there, waterlogged but present, a small weight against her ribs. In the corner booth, Carlo had gotten everything on film. He paid his bill, left a $100 tip that made the manager's eyes widen, and stepped out into the rain. His phone was already in his hand, Giovanni's number already dialing. Sofia didn't see him go. She was staring at nothing, at the space where Douglas Hale had stood, at the diner full of people who had watched her be humiliated twice in the span of 5 minutes. One of her co-workers, Marcus, who usually worked the opposite shift, came out from the kitchen and said, "Sofia, you should go home. You should rest. I'll close tonight." She nodded, not really hearing him. She collected her things from the break room, her thin jacket still damp from the rain this morning, the rain that had fallen while she was running toward Emma Valenti with blood on her hands and hope blooming in her chest for the first time in 4 years. Now that hope felt very fragile. Now it felt like it could be taken away just as easily as it had arrived. She stepped out into the October night. The rain was falling harder now, coming down in sheets, cutting through her jacket the way it always did. 3 blocks away, her bus would arrive at 12:17 a.m. She would ride it to her apartment. She would lie in bed and listen to the rain and understand that everything beautiful was temporary, that mercy was a lie, that the moment you thought you were safe, the world found new ways to hurt you. She didn't know that Carlo had already sent the video to Giovanni. She didn't know that in his penthouse apartment overlooking Los Angeles, Giovanni Valenti was watching footage of his mother, Emma's grandmother, watching his daughter's rescuer be destroyed, and that something dark and dangerous was stirring in his chest. She didn't know that at exactly that moment, his Lieutenant Luca was making phone calls, and that by morning, people would start disappearing. She just walked through the rain toward the bus stop, one step after another, carrying the weight of $22,000 of debt that wasn't financial anymore. The kind of debt that had to be paid in blood. At 3:13 a.m. in the diner bathroom, Sofia Sinclair sat on the cold tile floor with her knees pulled tight against her chest. Her uniform was soaked through with coffee and the residue of shame. The fluorescent light hummed above her head, casting everything in a sickly white that made her skin look like parchment, like something already dead. She had exactly $5 in her pocket. $5 and nothing else. The manager had fired her 1 hour ago. Not because she wasn't good at her job, she was excellent, she had been excellent for 3 years, but because Victoria Ashford had made a phone call. The woman had walked into this diner on a Tuesday evening dressed in a Chanel suit that cost more than Sofia's monthly rent, ordered a coffee she didn't drink, and spent 45 minutes telling the manager that Sofia was a liar, a manipulator, a woman with a criminal boyfriend who brought danger into decent establishments. The manager had believed her immediately. People always believed Victoria Ashford. Sofia pulled out her grandmother's prayer card, the edges worn soft from years of desperate fingers. The words were fading, "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." She almost laughed. The irony was so sharp it cut. The door to the bathroom was 3 feet away. On the other side of it, the diner stretched out in its familiar emptiness, the checkered black and white floor, the booths with their cracked vinyl seats, the kitchen where Marcus was closing up alone because she'd asked him to. She had told him she needed a moment. She had not told him that she was standing on the edge of something, that Douglas Hale's business card was burning in her other pocket like a coal. Money, he had promised. Security. Just one small compromise. Her hands trembled so badly the prayer card fluttered to the floor. The foreclosure notice had been handled, Giovanni's check had saved her apartment, had bought her 14 more days of breathing room. But what about next month? What about when the next crisis came, and it would come, because crisis was the only reliable thing in her life? She was so tired of being afraid. She was so tired of counting dollars in the dark, of choosing between food and medicine, of wondering which part of her would have to break next to keep the rest of her alive. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, "Sofia. Carlo told me what happened. Stay where you are. GV." She stared at it, confused, her tired mind struggling to process. Carlo was Giovanni's oldest lieutenant, the man with silver threading through his dark hair, the man who moved through the world like he was carved from granite. How would Carlo have known about the diner? How would he have? The front door opened. Even from the bathroom, she heard it, the chime, soft and absurd against the weight of what was about to happen. Then footsteps. Not the quick, tired shuffle of Marcus closing up. These were deliberate. Measured. The sound of someone who owned every step they took. Sofia's breath caught. She stood slowly, smoothing her ruined uniform with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She opened the bathroom door and stepped into the diner just as Giovanni Valenti turned to face her. He was still wearing the suit from yesterday, the black one that fit him like armor, but his shirt was open at the collar and his dark eyes were burning with something Sofia had never seen before. Something dangerous. Something that had her name written all over it. His face did something complicated when he saw her, rage and gentleness fighting for control, like a storm trying to decide whether to destroy or shelter. He was tall, broader than any man had a right to be, and he moved toward her with the kind of grace that only came from absolute confidence in your own power. A scar ran from his left temple to his cheekbone, a thin white line that spoke of violence survived. His gold watch caught the fluorescent light as he reached for her. "Get up," he said quietly. "You're done here." "I got fired," Sofia whispered. The word sounded small in the empty diner. "I know." Carlo recorded everything. Giovanni's hand came up, and she flinched without meaning to. But he was only gesturing, only showing her that he understood the scope of what had happened. Victoria walked in here knowing exactly what she was going to do. She orchestrated it. "The manager is already reconsidering, but you won't be going back." Sofia's stomach dropped. "What do you mean I won't be?" "I mean you're not waiting tables at 3 a.m. anymore." Giovanni helped her to her feet with careful hands, as if she were made of glass, as if she might shatter under anything rougher than absolute gentleness. "Tell me everything. Starting with the business card in your pocket." She should have lied. She should have denied it. But his eyes were on hers and there was no judgment in them, only a terrible, patient attention, and so she told him. She told him about Douglas circling her at the late-night diner 6 weeks ago, about how he'd learned her schedule, about the way he spoke to her in the language of desperation she understood too well. She told him about the offer he'd made tonight, $50,000, a place to stay, security, just one small step into his world. She told him that she'd almost said yes. She told him that for 30 seconds she had genuinely considered destroying her life because the alternative was being afraid forever. Giovanni listened with absolute stillness. When she finished, he made one phone call. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Luca, I need a gift wrapped for the Castellano family. 2 packages. Douglas Hale and Victoria Ashford. Full documentation of their activities. Trafficking networks, financial crimes, everything. I want the Castellanos to have immunity leverage. And I want it done before dawn." He hung up without waiting for an answer. "What does that mean?" Sofia asked. Giovanni's smile was winter itself, was the moment before a blizzard arrives. "It means they're about to learn that some people are protected. And touching them has consequences they cannot survive." At 4:27 a.m., 12 men in black moved through Los Angeles like ghosts. Douglas Hale was dragged from his apartment in his underwear, screaming, thrown into a van with no markings. His neighbors heard his voice crack and break and didn't call the police. They understood, at some level, that certain men simply disappeared when they became inconvenient. Victoria Ashford was taken from her Brentwood mansion in her silk nightgown, her face sheet white with terror as she realized who had come for her. She tried to call for help. No one came. The gates that had always protected her wealth meant nothing to men who operated in the spaces between law. They were driven separately to a warehouse in San Pedro, where Luca waited with files stacked like evidence of sins. Douglas's trafficking network, 12 women documented, federal crimes meticulously compiled. Victoria's financial crimes, her involvement in destroying vulnerable women for entertainment, her complicity in every destruction she'd orchestrated. "Please," Douglas begged, on his knees, trembling like a cornered animal trapped in a cage that was shrinking. "I'll disappear. I'll leave the country. I'll never." "Too late," Luca said. His voice was soft. The softest voices often accompanied the cruelest fates. At exactly 5:33 a.m., both were handed to the Castellano family, Giovanni's rivals, the men who controlled the territory west of downtown, the organization that had been looking for leverage against trafficking networks to gain federal immunity for their own crimes. The exchange was simple: these two monsters, with full documentation, in exchange for territory agreements and a silence that would last decades. Giovanni didn't want them dead. Death was too quick, too easy, too merciful. Death was what cowards deserved. What happened instead was systematic. Within 48 hours, an FBI raid hit Victoria Ashford's mansion. Her mansion was seized. Her bank accounts frozen. Her name appeared in every newspaper in the city, her social standing obliterated like a photograph held to flame. 40 years of carefully constructed reputation burned away in less than a week. Douglas Hale faced federal charges: human trafficking, wire fraud, coercion of minors. His entire network was dismantled. The 12 women he'd enslaved were freed, their testimony recorded, their evidence compiled. Douglas would spend the remainder of his natural life in a federal penitentiary, his name synonymous with monster, his face familiar only to other criminals who would have learned his story as a warning. They were dragged away screaming into the October cold, and they never surfaced again in any life that mattered. Giovanni returned to the diner at 7:33 a.m., where Sofia sat in a booth by the window watching dawn break over Los Angeles like a promise being kept. The city turned golden in the early light. She was still wearing her uniform, still wearing the shame, but something in her posture had shifted. She was waiting. She was no longer running. He slid into the seat across from her without asking permission. "It's handled," he said simply. "They'll never touch you again. They'll never touch anyone again." Sofia's hand shook around her coffee cup. The ceramic was warm and real, the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become liquid. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this for me? I'm nobody to you. I'm just the woman who saved your daughter." "Just?" Giovanni's voice carried a weight that made the word impossible. 3 weeks ago, you saved my mother from a car bomb. You didn't know it was coming. You didn't have a plan. You saw danger and you moved toward it. You risked everything for a stranger." He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made breathing difficult. "Before that, you saved Emma. You were running toward a child bleeding on a concrete playground when anyone else would have run the other way. You keep saving people, Sofia, without thinking about the cost to yourself. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing I've ever witnessed." "I was about to accept his offer," Sofia whispered. "I was about to walk away, Anne. But you didn't." His hand covered hers on the table, warm and steady like an oath. "You were standing on the edge of a darkness so deep it could have swallowed you whole. And you didn't jump. That's everything." The diner was silent except for the hum of the neon sign outside, the low rumble of delivery trucks beginning their morning rounds on the streets beyond, the sound of a city waking up to ordinary day while extraordinary things had happened in the dark. Sofia looked at their hands together on the cold formica table and understood, finally, what it meant to be chosen. What it meant to be seen. Sometimes one hand reached out at exactly the right moment can change an entire life. 3 weeks after Sofia moved into the Valenti mansion, the foreclosure notice still sat folded inside her grandmother's prayer card, tucked beneath her pillow like a holy relic. She kept it there not as a reminder of failure, but as proof she had survived. The card itself was frayed at the edges, the prayers written in faded Spanish, the kind of thing a woman held when the world was ending. Sofia held it now, sitting on the edge of her new bed, a real bed with clean sheets that smelled like lavender, and she couldn't quite believe it was hers. Emma's voice carried down the hallway, bright and unburdened. She was singing something she had learned at school, her sprained arm healed completely now, her nightmares fading like fog. Sofia folded the prayer card carefully and placed it back beneath her pillow. Some things were meant to be kept close. The mansion was quiet in the afternoon way, that suspended moment between lunch and dinner when the household seemed to hold its breath. Downstairs, Giovanni was in his study with Carlo and Luca, their voices low and urgent. Sofia heard the rumble of Italian words she didn't understand, the kind of conversation that made bodyguards stand straighter and men's hands move closer to their weapons. She tried not to listen. She had learned to move through this house like a ghost, present but unobserving, a skill developed from years of being invisible. But on this afternoon, something different happened. Giovanni appeared in the doorway of her room without knocking, without warning. He was still wearing his suit, charcoal gray, expensive beyond Sofia's comprehension, but his tie was loosened, the knot undone like he had been pulling at it. His dark eyes found hers with an intensity that made her stand immediately. "I need to show you something," he said. His voice carried no question, only statement. Sofia followed him downstairs, through the marble hallways lined with paintings that probably cost more than her entire life, past Carlo and Luca who exchanged glances as she passed. The study door closed behind them with a soft, deliberate click. Giovanni moved to a painting on the wall, a landscape of the Tuscan countryside, all golden light and rolling hills. He pressed something beneath the frame, and the painting swung inward, revealing a safe. His fingers moved across the combination with mechanical precision, and when the metal door opened, Sofia's breath caught. "This is documentation," he said quietly. "Everything Douglas Hale has ever done. Every transaction, every connection, every girl he trafficked through those connections. Every payment Victoria Ashford made to keep it quiet. Names. Dates. Amounts." He turned to face her. "FBI has wanted this for 8 years. I'm about to hand it to them." Sofia's legs felt unsteady. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you have a right to know what's happening. Because your safety depends on understanding exactly what we're doing." Giovanni's jaw tightened. "And because you deserve to see justice served. Not imagined. Not hoped for. Actually served." He pulled out a folder and opened it slowly, methodically. Sofia saw photographs, Douglas at restaurants with federal judges, with city councilmen, with other men whose faces she didn't recognize but whose presence in the pictures somehow amplified the evil. And there was Victoria, always dressed impeccably, always smiling in a way that made her look like a predator in designer clothing. "The bomb that went for my mother," Giovanni said, "wasn't random. It was Victoria. She panicked when you saved my mother's life. She thought you knew too much. She thought you were a threat." He closed the folder. "So she escalated. She ordered it. The investigation will prove it." The room felt like it was tilting. Sofia reached for the edge of his desk to steady herself. "How long?" she whispered. "How long until something happens?" "Not long." Giovanni's voice was steady in the way that meant it absolutely was not steady at all. 24 hours at most. The FBI is executing their operation at dawn. Douglas and Victoria will be arrested simultaneously in separate locations. There will be media coverage. Your name will likely surface. Sofia thought of her old life, the invisibility she had worn like a second skin. That invisibility was gone now, burned away by fire and courage and a man who had reached across darkness to pull her back. She was about to become visible in the worst possible way, exposed, questioned, made into a public figure whether she wanted to be or not. "I'm afraid," she said. Giovanni stepped closer, and for a moment she thought he might touch her, might close the distance that had been growing between them like a living thing. But he didn't. Instead he said, "Fear is intelligence. Fear means you understand what's at stake. What matters is that you're not afraid alone." That night, Sofia didn't sleep. She lay in her bed with her grandmother's prayer card in her hands, running her fingers over the worn edges, and she prayed, not for safety, but for the strength to endure what came next. The house around her was quiet except for the distant sound of someone pacing, footsteps on hardwood that she recognized as Giovanni's. At 5:38 in the morning, her phone buzzed. A news alert. Sofia's heart stopped as she read the headline, "Major Trafficking Network Dismantled in Overnight FBI Operation." She forced herself to scroll through the article, each sentence landing like a punch. Douglas Hale, arrested at his penthouse. Victoria Ashford, arrested at her country club in front of dozens of witnesses. 43 victims rescued. Federal charges that carried sentences of 20 to 40 years. And there, mentioned briefly but unmistakably, was a reference to courageous testimony from a key witness. Within 3 hours, 5 million people had seen the story. By noon, every local news outlet had picked it up. By evening, the story had spread nationwide. Sofia stayed in her room, unable to face the world beyond the door. Emma came to her, confused about why her beloved caregiver wouldn't come play, and Sofia held the child close without explaining that her own life had just become public property. Giovanni found her at sunset, standing at the window, watching the sky turn colors that had no names. He didn't ask permission to sit on her bed. He simply did it, the weight of his presence settling beside her like gravity. "It's over," he said. "The dangerous part is over. Sofia turned to look at him, and she saw something she hadn't seen before: exhaustion. Real, bone-deep exhaustion. "What about you?" she asked. "What happens to you now?" Giovanni was quiet for a long moment. "My family has connections to investigations now. My name will be part of this for a while. But I made a choice, Sofia. I chose justice over protection. I chose you." He said it simply, as if it was the only possible decision anyone could ever make. "That's what I'm doing next. I'm choosing you. Every day. Every time something matters. That's the choice." Sofia reached for his hand. His grip was warm and solid, exactly what she needed it to be. Outside, Los Angeles sprawled beneath the darkening sky, indifferent to the small transformations happening within its borders. But inside this room, with Emma sleeping down the hallway and Carlo standing guard downstairs and a man who had been made of stone now sitting beside her with his hand in hers, the world had shifted fundamentally. Douglas Hale sat in a federal holding cell, his expensive suit torn at the seams, his carefully constructed empire collapsing into dust. Victoria Ashford was being processed into the system, her social standing annihilated, her name destined to appear in articles about predators and fraud. They had believed Sofia was nobody, invisible enough to destroy without consequence. They had been catastrophically wrong. If this story moved you, don't just watch, like this video right now. Share it with someone who needs to remember that one act of courage can change everything. Subscribe and turn on notifications because tomorrow's story will hit even harder. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done in Sofia's position. Your story matters. I'll see you in the next one.